When I was a freshman in high school, I refused to miss a basketball practice for any reason, because playing basketball was the only thing that I really cared about. The only thing that eventually changed that was a shit. I'd like to point out at the top that I hesitated to tell this story, not because it's embarrassing or gross, it's neither of those things, but since it happens to involve a turd somewhere along the way, I was concerned that that would pull too much focus, as they tend to do, when this story is about so much more than that. This is about one of those pivotal moments of my high school life that I think for most people probably took the form of a slow dance with their crush at senior prom, or a college acceptance letter to the school of their dreams, but for me, took the form of just a steamy deuce. Not everyone's coming-of-age story gets to be Lady Bird, unfortunately, but I hope you can trust that I'm aiming at something similar here. And so with that said, the first thing I'd like to point out is that it wasn't mine. I wasn't even in the building when it happened, but a real dookie did change my real life in a real way. And like I mentioned, at the time, playing basketball was really the only thing that I cared about. But not in a breakfast clubby, Emilio Estevez being a popular jock who taped Larry Lester's buns together sort of a way. I played basketball in a I have no social skills. And this is a parentally approved activity that lets me do less school sort of a way. And I really didn't like school, and so being the best basketball player possible was pinned to the top of my mind like a lackluster tweet. And if my basketball obsession sounds exaggerated, it really wasn't. It's just as simple as that I was one of those kids who knew what he wanted to be when he grew up. Which some people try and frame as an admirable quality, except those people are just trying to trick children into becoming sociopaths. Because when you're a teenager, you should be taking in as much of life as possible, not trying to become a pimpled and horny savant. And I never reached the status of savant, but at the time I was very horny for basketball. But it turned out that I was much hornier for basketball than it was for me. Because I injured my knees for the rest of my life because I played through things that I shouldn't have played through. I didn't foster relationships that would have been awkward when I was 15, but ended up becoming much more awkward when I was 22. And I refused to miss a single basketball practice because one of my heroes at the time was a billionaire actual sociopath named Michael Jordan, who once famously played an amazing game of basketball despite being a mucusy nightmare. And I thought if he could do it, I could too, I guess. I believe I can fly. No, I can't. And the only thing that eventually changed all of that was a deuce.
Stay tuned.
The day that it happened, I went to go change into my gym clothes before practice, and our locker room was just a 10 by 15 foot rectangle, and at the back was a cramped single stall bathroom. But affixed to our bathroom door by a piece of Scotch tape were the rules to our locker room. And to be clear, this was not an officially sanctioned document by our high school. They were written by our bad boy team captain named Matt onto the back of one of his failed math tests. And so on the flipped over side that you couldn't see was an Algebra 2 quiz that was graded at F. And on the flipped over side you could see were our locker room rules. And I say rules, but there ended up only being one. In capital letters were the words "no allowed." And the reason Matt wrote "no allowed" was I think he wrote it. I'm actually not sure. I guess that could have been his math teacher's mean way of saying he was very bad at Algebra 2. The reason it was on our bathroom door then was because our locker room had no AC or ventilation of any kind. And so any dirty business that went down in there was trapped in a combo airlock petri dish, just a rectum angle that we had to sweat inside for 6 months while our coach screamed at us because we were not savants at basketball. And our locker room was already haunted by the farts of 5 previous graduating classes, and so all of us agreed no allowed. And I mention that because it was a rare moment of consensus for our team. Because not a lot of people got along that year, and for many reasons, you know? We had a new coach, we had several freshmen on the varsity team, including me, and so I felt like a misfit. And someone else who I realize now must have also felt out of place was a senior named James Ward.
The names have been changed to protect the innocent.
But where I felt like a misfit because basketball was the only thing that I cared about, James was the opposite. The only reason that he showed up was because his parents made him play basketball. And so where I refused to miss a single practice, I remember one time during a workout, our coach screamed at James and said, "If you're not going to try, just leave." Which would have been mortifying to me, except James just shrugged okay and left. And what I was too young and dumb to understand at the time is that James was a hero. Over the course of our season, he wore down our coach to the point where he would openly play God of War on his PSP, in his breakaway pants, on the bench, during games.
Perfect combo.
Which, all of that made me think that James was incapable of giving any shits. Until...
Stay tuned.
One day I showed up early to change into my gym clothes before practice, and I saw sitting in the hallway outside our locker room, slumped over, was a junior named Tyler. And he was laughing. And so I said, "What's going on?" And in between breaths, he gasped, "He did it! He did it! James took a shit in there." Which felt like an over-exaggeration to me, and so I opened the door, and what I see is totally normal. It's just James tying his shoes, except I am unable to walk inside because of the smell. But that's the wrong word, because the smell of James's transcended the realm of odors into becoming something physical. You could feel it on your skin like sunlight. I am confident that if James had been wearing his breakaway pants at the time, they would have broken away. And so the only way that my body could process the sensory overload was I just started laughing. And so I closed the door and sat next to Tyler. And the same thing happened to everyone else. Every 30 seconds, someone would show up, ask us what's going on, open the door, and then sit down right next to us until the majority of our basketball team was just clown carring in the small hallway outside our locker room. The last person to arrive, though, was our bad boy team captain, Matt. And we were all concerned about how he was going to respond to seeing that James had disregarded the Martin Luther feces theses that he had tacked onto the bathroom door. But this was the moment that Matt proved he was a leader. His math test made us think he didn't know how to solve number problems, but I can tell you that Matt dealt with this number 2 with a poise and a confidence that would have made his algebra teacher blush. Immediately, he started delegating people to fix it. He had me go get a brick to prop open the door. He sent another kid to go get fans out of our maintenance closet. Another kid held their breath and went inside and got our jerseys out. We never had any chemistry on the court, but James's really sparked something in us. We were coming together like we were in the third act of a movie about kids who play basketball but have a hard time coming together. And so once everything was airing, we walked to a safe distance, which was down the hallway, past double doors, down another hallway, and then past a door, into the gym. And practice was running for about 5 minutes when our coach stopped everything and said,
"What is that smell?"
because it turned out our teamwork was no match for the on-court dominance of James's turd. That deuce dunked on us so hard it fogged the backboards. And this happened now, over 10 years ago, and so sometimes I wonder, could my teenage memory be exaggerating the smell? But then I remember that our coach canceled the rest of practice that day. I missed my first practice. Not because I had the emotional maturity to identify that sometimes you don't need to go to a basketball practice, but because James's sage bowels made the decision for me. As soon as it was canceled, everyone fled, but I went back to the ground zero of our locker room, and I saw that the no sign was laying on the floor. And I don't know if someone ripped it down in protest, or if it had just symbolically fallen. Like the way that
The veil of the temple was rent in twain.
What I do know is that something in me died that day. I still really cared about playing basketball, but that day I learned there are more important things in life, like not defining my commitment to something by an arbitrary streak, like whether or not I missed a basketball practice, and understanding that there was more to my identity than just playing basketball. And that day, maybe above all, taught me the critical importance of proper ventilation. Thank you
Thank you for playing.